Hey there, BookTube. Noah. Everyone who reads it must converse is the channel. Thanks for coming by. Today I'm going to talk about the Recognitions by William Gaddis. This was March reading, March of the Mammoths, right? A reading challenge on BookTube here where we focus on the big book. I read this with Mark Nash, Kathy Grimm, the Grimm Reader, Intellectual Reads. I'm going to link them in the description box. We're still talking about it. Most have not finished yet. This book is insanely complex. It's awesome. This will serve as a first-time reader's account of what it's like to read the Recognitions. And last year I read J.R. J.R. is one of the funniest books that I've ever read in my life. It is complex as well. It is an amazing ear for dialogue is what Gaddis has. And that comes through in the Recognitions, but it is masterfully done in J.R. So the Recognitions is William Gaddis's debut novel. I want to stress that right at the beginning because it is unbelievable that this is a debut novel for a writer. And I think that, anybody who's sitting here throwing shade on the Recognitions, just think about other debut novels that you've read and how ambitious is the most ambitious that a debut novel can be. How ambitious and how much kind of understanding of a first novel do you give an author for their debut and that kind of stuff. When approaching this, your mind will be blown. I'm going to do the best I can, but like I said, when it comes down to it, this will serve as like a first-time reader what they see Gaddis is doing, what I see Gaddis is doing in the Recognitions. So the theme of the Recognitions and what goes out the whole book, goes through the whole book, is this thing of art, its relationship to humanity and humanity's relationship with art, all the different aspects of that relationship. Obviously, one cannot exist without the other, and the other cannot exist without the one, chicken and the egg, right? It could be argued, I guess, that nature or the universe itself is beautiful and art itself, right? And that is where we start with the Recognition. So our main character's name is Wyatt Gwyon, something like that. He's a young kid. His father is kind of an esoteric Christian. He is a Christian. He actually is a leader of a church, a small church in a small town. And Wyatt grows up mainly being brought up and cared for by his Aunt May, right? Aunt May has a very strict Christian belief. It is very kind of Puritan, Calvinistic. It is very much laid out, set in stone kind of thing. And so what Wyatt does, he has an affinity for art ever since he's a kid, of course, right? He brings a piece of art, like a drawing of a bird, I believe is what it was, to Aunt May, and says, he's proud of this, and he shows it to her, and she says, "What are you trying to do? Are you trying to take the place of your Lord and Savior Jesus Christ?" And he's like, "What?" He goes, "Well, by creating something, and you thinking that you can create something, God has already created that, and God's already created it and made it perfect. And by you trying to create something, you're trying to take the place of God. It's the same as being Satan, and by shunning God, blaspheming God, all this kind of stuff, and crumples it up, throws it away. And he is in this kind of place for a lot of his young life. Not overtly, you know what I mean? It's like one of these things that is a cornerstone experience for him that may or may not even be fully conscious all the time as a root for things, but us as readers can see it, right? Wyatt kind of follows in his father's footsteps for a bit, goes off to join the priesthood, right? Goes to seminary, doesn't really get into it, drops out, and goes off to be an artist. Goes to a university in Germany, I believe, and then we meet up with Wyatt. There is a kind of a lapse in time, or a jump in time, where we meet up with Wyatt in Paris, and he's in the Paris art scene, social scene, that kind of thing. During this first part of the book, there is definitely those kind of wonderful Gaddis things, and he does it, I would say, it's kind of a proto way of doing it that of what we see in JR, because there's just conversations happening. You'll hear something over here, you'll hear something over there, you'll see somebody doing something on this street, and then there's a bit of a conversation. In a coffee shop, hear a bit of conversation, and then we'll hone in and we'll kind of land on some characters, and we'll follow them for a little bit. And there's those kind of scenes like that are actually a bunch of scenes, all, you know, kind of chopped up, and you just kind of get this portrait of a town, portrait of a city, portrait of a society, or you know, and how those people are living right there and what's going on. It's amazing to see that in Gaddis's first novel, and those kind of things start happening pretty quick. First couple hundred pages, you'll get a couple of those kind of scenes, few of them, and then Wyatt gets married. It's a quick marriage, and Wyatt and his wife Esther are living a quiet life, but we see very quickly that Wyatt is psychologically in turmoil. There's this kind of thing where he wants to be an artist. He gets approached by a critic to says, hey, I'll give you good marks if you accept this. You know, give me 10%, 15% of your sales, right? So the critic actually becomes the, you know, like the manager, the agent for this, for the artist, and it's a conflict of interest. It totally isn't right, and so Wyatt just shuns that, and he shuns like the popular art world because of this. He still wants to create art, and he still does art, but he is copying these old works. He's copying works from the masters. But he is very psychologically dark, and in places where he can't really give and receive love. And it's really, really messed up. You know what I mean? And we get a portrait of a very messed up main character. At that time, we're back in New York. Wyatt and Esther move back to New York, and they have a place there. And we are in the New York social scene, friends of Wyatt and Esther, and the kind of society that they live in. And then there's like the notorious party scenes, right? Anybody who's heard anything about recognitions knows that you have these party scenes that are brought up and said to go on for 40, 50, 70 pages, right? And that's it does happen, okay? It doesn't happen a lot. It doesn't happen all the time. You know, some of these party scenes are not, I mean, I don't think that they're oppressive. We'll get to that in a little bit. But at that point in New York, we start having some of these party scenes, and they serve as wonderful comic relief to the very dark psychological subject matter of Wyatt. Now, Wyatt gets approached by a his name is Rectal Brown, and I'll leave you to work that out yourself. A very kind of a Freudian name, if you get my drift. Rectal Brown is a bankroller. He's somebody who is a financier, and he says, you know what, you got the chops, man. You got the talent. We can I'll commission you to do some paintings, not copies, but an original painting by an old master. And so what does that mean? Okay? He means an actual new painting that Wyatt's going to do, but he's going to do it in the style of an old master. Somebody like Bruegel. Somebody like, Van der Graus is a guy that they're talking about a lot that Wyatt copies. And it's this whole fraudulent scheme, right? There is fraud and counterfeit and deceit and putting up a front almost in every single character in a myriad different ways. It is so wild how many different ways that Gaddis can explore the idea of originality as opposed to fraud or counterfeit or copying, and not just art, but every single thing that humans can get into in that way, even within themselves, in their stories, in their way that they present themselves. So there is a character named Otto, who is a friend of Wyatt's and Esther's. And Wyatt, when he gets hired on by Rectal Brown to do this kind of thing, he takes the commission. He does it. He leaves. He leaves his house, and Otto kind of steps in the role with Esther as the husband there. And they have an affair, and that's just how it goes. Wyatt, at this point, ceases to be Wyatt. And so then we have a kind of a loss of identity. Not kind of. We have a complete loss of identity. That is explored very, very well in this book. And from then on in the book, our main character is no longer named Wyatt. He is no longer named anything for a long time until we get to the end. And I'm not going to go all the way through it like that. I'm going to stay in a thematic way of talking about this, because there is a lot to say about critics and having a critical view of art. Because who criticizes art? Well, the best kind of criticism that you can get on a certain branch of art is by somebody that is within that field and working within that field. They are artists. Somebody who is critiquing literature. We want a high-level writer to be doing that, right? And same thing with art, same thing with movies, same thing with any of that stuff. The people that sit and critique art most of the time, and whose Gaddis is talking about and calling out in this, is people whose job it is to critique, and they are basically just saying how they would do it. And he calls that out explicitly, that critics go at art from a level of how they would do it. It's not how it should be done, because there's not an objective, perfect way of doing a piece of art, especially an original idea, right? Putting something out there and trying something new. That there's not an original, there's not an objective way of looking at something like that and saying, well, this would be perfect if it was like this, that, or the other. It's new. It's something that hasn't been done or whatever, right? So what they're doing is critiquing it on a basis of personal feelings of how they would have executed something that they could never have come up with the idea for in the first place. That's why they're a critic. And it's pretty scathing is what it comes down to. Also, there's a scathing look of art itself, because when it comes down to it, art and writing, we have all these wonderful writers, okay? But how many writers are there that are mediocre? There's probably 100 to 1 mediocre writers to wonderful writers, and maybe something like 10,000 to 1 of writers that will last on for 1,000 years, something like that, right? It's insane to think about what level a piece of art has to be on to really last throughout humanity. And that kind of thing is explored in this book very well. Called out in the way of Basil Valentine is Rectal Brown's right-hand man, and he's working with the nameless one, Wyatt. He's working with them, and he's actually in touch with a lot of critics, and they actually insert these new paintings by a quote-unquote master into the art world, have it verified, and all that, and then they sell it for, $50,000, rather than, Wyatt over here, if he's painting his own stuff, he's going to sell a painting for $100, $500 at best, right? Something like that. So it calls into question that thing of what is art, and this kind of thing. One, it is an original painting. The painting that's done is an original of what is on the canvas. It's done in a style indistinguishable from an old master, and therefore attributed to an old master. So, is there artistic merit there? It's a crime, right? To do this because it's fraudulent by whose name is on it. But that canvas and that artwork is art like that. There is an unbelievable amount of literary references. There's an unbelievable amount of artistic references to past artists, music. All levels of art are amazingly explored in here. I will say that there is a party scene that is part 2, chapter 7, that is like a 70-page monolith right near. After you get past that part, it's all climax. You know what I mean? And I see how it can get tedious for people, because it got tedious for me when it comes down to it. It's just a huge like a party that never stops. And so much happens, it's information overload. But in that scene is so much wonderful stuff. Gaddis was head of the Harvard Lampoon when he went to Harvard. He was head of the Harvard Lampoon. And so he has an amazing idea and sense of satire and humor. And the way that the way that things are played in that party scene really drive home a lot of the humor, because that is the final kind of big party scene that we get. And like I said, after that, the book, I'm not going to talk about anything after that happens, because it's all climax. It's all just giving you what you need, right? And the whole book gives you what you need. It's a wonderful read. But there are things like, children showing up from downstairs. They're like in an apartment, right? In an apartment building. And there's like children that show up from downstairs saying, "Hey, my mommy sent me up for some sleeping pills. Do you have any?" And they're just giving them out. You know what I mean, to these kids. There's a lot of satire and critique of the pharmaceutical company as business, that they're going to make your life better by selling you something, and that's just what the pharmaceutical industry um, is played and is to Gaddis in a big way. There's a company called Necrostyle, and necro meaning death. Necrostyle is a sleep aid, right? But the thing is Necrostyle, named death, that is your sleep aid, is a wafer that melts in your mouth so you don't have to chew it. So what is it modeled after? The Eucharist, right? it's it's ridiculous. And a lot of the okay, so in that party seat, that's where the discussion of the critique of the critic is as well. And there's a lot of conversation going on. The kind of scenes that are snippets and giving you the idea of the town and different peoples and coming together like that in the beginning of the book turn into these party scenes in the middle part of the book, where there's just conversation all going on. There might be a radio going with music and ads as well, that kind of stuff. And in that, Gaddis really shines. It's funny. It's wild as hell, and it is something that just flex. He's flexing his ear for dialogue and conversation, which is completely worked out to the hilt in JR. It's amazing. So, altogether, I can say it's a wonderful read, a completely pleasurable read, a wonderful read. There are some parts that you're just going to have to buckle down and read. It is an amazingly complex work. I probably got, I probably got 70% of what this book is trying to do, at best, on my first reading. It is so complex. It is amazing. And so it is something to mull over and to think about. And in a year or in 2 years, I will pick it up and I'll give it a reread and get a lot more out of it and this kind of thing. There is a lot of fraud, counterfeit, even to the point of religion played in this as well, that I didn't even touch on, because I didn't touch on a lot of stuff. I'm not gonna do it justice with a video, short or long. So trying to do a good job, just kind of give you guys an idea off of what a first impression reader is of it. And I'm a big William Gaddis fan. I love Gaddis now, having read the Recognitions in JR. And next is A Frolic of His Own. I don't know if I'll get to it this year, but you see I found me a trade paperback copy just to make it a little easier for the reading. So who knows? Maybe I will pick it up. Thank you, BookTube. Any comments, anything, let's talk about it. I know that Recognitions is getting a lot of hype right now because these new editions came out in YRB, and they're really, really good. They read great. And so people are reading it now. There's a reading group going in April that is reading it. So let me know. Let me know what y'all think. And talk to you later, BookTube. Thank you. Bye-bye.